Okay, so these are my Bioblitz organisms. So the Scurius carolinensis, commonly known as the eastern gray squirrel or um, squirrel. I mean, there's two different main types of squirrels. There's the western gray squirrel and the eastern gray squirrel. Obviously, being from the East Coast, this is the one that I was able to find. So they're omnivores, and so they're going to gain their energy from scavenging food such as nuts, leaves, and seeds. The eastern gray squirrel reproduces sexually, and the gestation period is about 4 to 6 weeks. And 25% of the litter dies within the first year, and the ones that survive likely are going to live another 4 to 5 years, some living as long as 10 years. And the mating season occurs during the winter and late spring. So during the winter, it's from about December to February, and late spring, it's about May to June. Um, so there's two different times where there's about a litter of like 2 to 9. The mother cares for the young for roughly 6 weeks, and it's only the mother that cares for the litter. Um, Squirrels kind of help humans in a weird way where when they hide their seeds and nuts, they sometimes forget where they place them, and those seeds could actually result in a new tree if it's in favorable conditions and can grow. And squirrels' front teeth actually never stop growing because it helps keep up with their lifestyle because they eat hard nuts and seeds very often, so their teeth are kind of um, like being filed down constantly. Lumbricus terrestris, which is known as the common earthworm. Earthworms are decomposers and consume dirt and decaying matter, and earthworms must live in a moist environment in order to survive. So they live in soil and they move by decomposing the soil and decaying matter around them, which in turn gets used by the plants, and it's kind of like a fertilizer because the castings have all the nutrients that the soil needs in it. When they move around, they help aerate the soil, and it allows for more air and water to get into the soil. Earthworms help humans in the aspect of helping to aerate and fertilize the soil, as said before, with the castings and everything. This in turn will lead to a greater amount of farm productivity because the soil is just more fertilized. Earthworms have no eyes, but some have light receptors, so they can tell when they're underground in a dark area like the soil or if they're above the soil. Hyacinthus orientalis. It's commonly known as the hyacinth. It's a species of flowering plants, and they gain their energy by the process of photosynthesis. A hyacinth can reproduce by separating their bulbs in their root system. So this can be done when the hyacinth is no longer bloomed, when it's not in its peak. So kind of more so in the fall, you can separate the bulbs, and if you place them into separate areas, they can grow separately as two independent hyacinths. So the juice from the bulbs actually is helpful to humans in that it's sticky and it's kind of like a glue type of stickiness. So it used to be used for the bindings of books. Um, However, hyacinths, their bulbs, their leaves, everything about them essentially is poisonous, and it can cause skin irritation and other sorts of problems. Entodon seductrix, it's commonly known as seductive endoton moss, or just moss. Mosses gain their energy from the process of photosynthesis, and a moss can reproduce sexually and asexually. So, sexually, a moss's archegonia and antheridia are able to meet at the female gametophytes, which is at the ends of the moss, like kind of at the tips, and that's where fertilization occurs. Asexually, mosses can reproduce. If the piece is moved, if the piece breaks off of the moss and is placed in the right conditions and is in a moist environment, it can grow independently on its own. So mosses help humans in that since they're so good at holding moisture and water very well, they can help control flooding and soil erosion or anything with erosion. They're also really important to farmers in that they can be used as fertilizers to provide nutrients to their crops. And mosses actually evolved from algae, becoming the first plants to survive on solid ground. Apuria finke, commonly known as lichen or fluffy dust lichen, lichen obtain their energy through the process of photosynthesis, and lichen grow from extending their thallus, so their lifespan is difficult to determine because once it detaches from the thallus, they can grow independently. Um, but if one half dies, you don't really know if you consider it still living because they are genetically identical because it did break off. Or the other way, two independent lichens can merge together. So lichens are important to humans in that they provide us with dyes and scents, and some can actually withstand high radiation, allowing for further exploration, as possibly using it as sunscreen or another productive chemical. So scientists are currently looking into that to see what they can use it for. So finding organisms wasn't particularly hard for me. Um, for the flowering and non-flowering plants, I had a general idea of where to look around my yard. I thought a couple days in advance about places where I could possibly find these organisms and other places in my neighborhood. I then thought about the invertebrates and immediately thought I could find one in a dark, damp area. So for me, I knew maybe I could find an invertebrate, such as an earthworm. In the soil, I have a wood pile in my yard, so I thought maybe under the wood, on top of the soil, I could find an earthworm in there, and sure enough, I found plenty. The most difficult to find was the fungus. So I found a lichen after a couple days of searching different areas of my neighborhood. So I actually was looking at a bunch of different barks on trees because I knew that's where it's commonly found. And I found it in like a little crevice of a tree, kind of shaded. So advice I would give to other people is to think about common areas you would find such organisms. So like the earthworm, I knew it had to be or commonly be in a dark, damp area. And then also the moss is in a shaded area where it can remain moist and hold that water. Then I would compare it to other organisms located in the area to identify what species you may have found and to see if it's indigenous to the area which you found. So I compared um, on the iNaturalist app because there was a couple different options I could choose from, and I was seeing what areas they were commonly found. So that's how I decided what the species I had found most likely was. So hypothesis, I want to set up an experiment to study the lichen. One idea I'd propose as a hypothesis would be if given favorable environmental conditions, the lichen will continue to grow to a great size. So I want to observe its growth over the course of a couple months. This is because, as I said before, the lifespan and growth of lichen is very unpredictable. So as previously mentioned, two lichen can merge and form one organism, even though they're two genetically different and independent organisms. Or they can split and still remain genetically identical, which is what makes it hard to determine the lifespan of lichen. I also really want to study how lichen interacts with other organisms in its environment. So as I found it um, living on bark. So um, it wasn't really offering anything to the bark, but the bark was giving it a place to live. So I want to study relationship between them and possibly other relationships between other organisms in the lichen, if it's benefiting any other organisms or if any other organisms are helping it to survive. As I said before, it does give some benefits to humans with the dyes and the fragrances, but I really want to see any other um, relationships that could possibly help it with its growth. And these are my citations.